everyone. Thanks for joining us here. So this is the Union County Wildlife Chapters program on the Bradford Pear. And tonight we have my good friend, Leslie Moorman, who is joining us here from the Urban Forest Council. And she'll be speaking about the Bradford Pear tonight. And there will actually be two Bradford Pear programs coming up in person as part of the Bradford Pear Bounty that will be coming up in the next few months. So I guess Leslie will touch on that. And thank you to the Union County Wildlife Chapter for hosting this tonight. And thank you, Leslie, for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing from your presentation.
Great, thanks for having me. Do you want me to start, or is that okay?
You can go for it. Yeah.
All right, let me share my screen just so I can make sure y'all see all the pretty pictures. All right, is that coming through? Everybody sees?
Looks perfect.
Excellent. All right. So, all right. Well, good evening. And then for those of you that are watching the recording, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm just going to give kind of a quick overview of the Bradford Pear Bounty program here in North Carolina. Give a little bit of background on why it's an issue and what we're trying to do with it, and kind of go from there. As Tara mentioned, I am the executive director for the North Carolina Urban Forest Council, and one of the starting groups for the North Carolina Bradford Pear Bounty program here, along with NC State Extension, North Carolina Forest Service, and the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So we've all kind of joined forces to help draw attention to and start working towards a solution for some of the Bradford Pear issues going on across North Carolina. Before I jump into it, I'm going to go ahead and give props and thanks and salutations to Kelly Oaten. She is a professor at NC State University, and she has let me borrow a lot of her presentation. I've just made a couple of changes to it, but this is pretty much her presentation, so I want to thank her for allowing me to do that. So we'll just jump right on into it. I figured first I'd start off with a little bit of background of Bradford Pear, Callery Pear, and history behind it, just because people need to know where it's coming from, and maybe it'll lead into what the issue is and what we're trying to do. So Callery Pear, which is Pyrus calleridiana, is the proper, it's the species. But the Bradford Pear is actually just a cultivar, a variety of Callery Pear. But so Callery Pear is the problem child here. So it's a non-native, it's from Asia. Shocker, a lot of our ornamental trees and plants and shrubs and stuff are from Asia. And it was brought to the US back in the early 1900s, back into California actually, as a possible solution for fire blight resistance. So California had a pretty big industry for the fruit producing pears in California, and they were all getting real sick from fire blight. They're all real susceptible to it. And so they found that Callery Pear is actually resistant to it. So they were going to try and hybridize it and do all this, fancy genetic work to try and keep the industry alive. So that's when it was first brought back to the US in California. And then during all of the genetics and hybridizing and testing, scientists like to finagle and manipulate things as much as possible. They came across some varieties that started showing some ornamental promise. So Bradford Pear was the first variety out there, but there are others that have been created since then. Chanticleer, Aristocrat, and a couple others out there you'll find at some nurseries and box stores across the country. But Bradford was the first cultivar out there. It was first developed in 1950s, sometime around then. And during that time, they fell in love with it, and it was determined to be a one-hit wonder, ultimate solution to urban tree planting, and because of a couple different characteristics that it had. So it's a little bit of history about Callery Pear. So Bradford, as I said, is a variety, 1950s, and they started liking it because it's a really showy tree. It's got not big, they're tiny, but a lot of beautiful white flowers that pop out in the early spring. It's pest resistant. It's very hard to find any insects or diseases that impact the tree. It's part of the genetics when they came up with it. And it was considered low maintenance in comparison to other horticultural species at the time. So it's kind of like the solution to urban tree planting back in the 50s and 60s. So that's where it comes from. That's where it kind of first developed. And it's supposed to be sterile. That was the other thing. Doing all the genetic work, it does not self-pollinate. Bradford pears cannot pollinate themselves. So they, again, thought it would be a non-issue down the road. So it's a wonderful solution to a lot of our urban issues. One of the other characteristics of it is really tolerant of poor soils. So most of our urban soils are not that great. All the topsoil has been removed, it's been compacted. They're left with, at least in the Southeast, and specifically here in North Carolina, most of our urban soils are very clay. They're subsoils, not a lot of organic material in it. So it's hard to get some species to survive and thrive in that. And Bradford pear is one of those that does really well in those really harsh urban conditions. So all this kind of led to it being really heavily planted in the beginning in the 60s and then on through the 90s. You'll see street after street after street that's nothing but Bradford pears. It was just the go-to that all of the developers planted, all the landscapers planted. So that's kind of where it came from. So yeah, it's pretty, but after it's been planted for a while, there are some things that started popping up as problematic. And probably the first and foremost, if any of y'all have been around Bradford pears, if you had one in your neighborhood or in your yard, the first thing you'll notice is the smell of those wonderful, beautiful white flowers. They're very, very pretty from a distance. But when you get close up to them, it starts to smell like a little bit of like stuff that's gone rotten. Some people say it smells like rotten fish. It just is not pleasant. A lot of stuff, it's very potent. And where that smell is coming from, it's an attractant to insects and pollinators. So the flowers are doing what they're supposed to do. They're trying to attract pollinators there. But it's just not a very good smell when you've got, a street that's lined with 50 Bradford pears. They all flower at once, and it's just a really overwhelming thing. So I don't think anybody's ever said spring is missing the smell of rotten dead animals. so it's all coming from these trees. There's some other issues that have kind of cropped up over time as it's been out in the landscape. This is often, if you've had a Bradford pear, you've seen this. This is pretty common. And what that derives from is the form of the tree itself. So I wish I had a really good picture of it. I should have added it here. If you look back at this one, you see that all the branch unions are these really tight V unions. So instead of having those nice broad obtuse angles where it's like a U, 60 degrees or more, which is a proper branch union construction where the weight is evenly distributed, Bradford pear has really tight unions, branch unions. You combine that tight branch union with the wood fibers themselves. So it's a fast growing tree. That's one of the other reasons why it's really commonly planted in urban landscape is homeowners want the fastest turnaround on those trees. They want the biggest bang for their bucks. They want a tree that's going to put it in the ground, and within 3 to 5 years, you're seeing it grow, you're seeing it flower, you're seeing it leaf out and be all pretty and get big and offer a little bit of shade. Bradford pears do that. They're a very fast growing tree. The problem with the biology behind that is the wood fibers themselves, because it's a fast growing tree, they're not super hardy. It's a weak wood fiber. And you'll find that in any really fast growing tree. Bradford pear, you just combine a fast growing tree with a poor branch union structure, and you get a tree that's going to fall apart in windstorms or ice events. So this is pretty common. They don't cause a lot of damage because they're not very big trees. They're a medium sized tree, getting about maybe 30 feet tall over the lifespan if it's a good site. So it's not going to destroy your house or anything like that, but it can cause some yard damage. It can, if it falls on your car, it's not going to be nice. If it happens to be planted along a sidewalk and you have pedestrians or people driving their cars right there, that could lead to a lot of issues down the road, a lot of liability issues. So it's not something that they thought about at the time on where this was going to be planted. So, and then the other thing I mentioned, it was being sterile. You might ask, well, why are we having all these issues with it being invasive? And that because Bradford pears cannot self-pollinate. So a Bradford pear crossed with a Bradford pear, you're not going to get seeds. The problem is we started creating more cultivars, more varieties out there. That's what I mentioned, the Chanticleer, the Cleveland Select, the Aristocrat, and a Bradford pear can cross-pollinate with any other variety of calorie pear. And that's when you're going to get the seeds, and it's going to germinate and they're going to grow. And once the cross-pollination happens, those seeds are viable, and birds will eat them, and they'll be transported, and they're going to poop them out, a mile down the road or 50 feet down the road, depending on the bird species. And that's when you're going to get the natural wild calorie pears coming back in. So they kind of messed that up. And they just don't always, science is great and it solves a lot of solutions, but we've got to be always prepared that nature finds a way. I always relate this back to the Jurassic Park. Nature finds a way. Just because we anticipate it not being sterile and not being contained, nature will find a way. They will hybridize, they will cross-pollinate and get out there and do its thing. So calorie pear. Bradford pear is pretty much the universe, that's what everybody calls it. Bradford pear is a calorie pear. And once it goes back and cross-pollinates and is starting to grow up wild in our along the roadsides or the edge of the forest, it's back to being a calorie pear. That's the escaped progeny. So even though we call all these things Bradford pear bounties, it's because that's what they're planted as in the urban landscape. What goes into the woods, that's the calorie pear. So it's all calorie pear, whether you call it Bradford or not. And this is what you're going to see along the roadways. It's the first thing you see out there. It is, as I said, it does early spring flowers. So if in March, early March, you see all these trees that have the white flowers, that's going to be calorie pear. And these are all everything circled in this picture here. Those are calorie pear. That is right across the street from a neighborhood that planted rows and rows in their neighborhood, and then it's escaped into the natural woodland or remnant woodland across the street. So it's the first thing you're going to see. It flowers first, it leaves out first. You can see in this picture, if you ignore all the red circles, the only other trees that have leaves on them are the pine trees in the background. Everything else is still bare. So these Bradford pears, what's going to make a species invasive is they take advantage of the site first. They're aggressive. they outcompete the native species. So that's what happens is you have these trees that flower first. So that's where the pollinators are going to go. They leaf out first. So they start to shade out a lot of the native trees and shrubs, and which ends up, you end up with a uniform species. You kill off the diversity. You're going to have a less diverse forest canopy, less diverse ground cover because it's shaded out. You're going to decrease the diversity of food sources for wildlife. You're going to, it has all these ramifications down the road. And I think I've got some more pictures of other, so here's the one I was talking about. It's a great picture. And this, I think, is actually, so this is David Coyle in South Carolina that took this picture. If anybody ever comes to Raleigh, that's where I am, and you have Dorothea Dix Park right off downtown. All it is on any of the edges and the roadsides, this is what you see in March. It's nothing but white flowers, and it's all calorie pear. And here's just another picture. So here's what it starts to leaf out. It's like this really light pale green, and it tends to darken as the spring progresses. It's really dense canopy. They'll end up forming thickets that'll shade out everything, and actually has been found to block wildlife corridors because it just gets so dense and thick. Wildlife aren't going to go in there, and that's mainly because here's another picture. Everything you see green in this understory is Bradford pear, and this is a white pine stand. It's off of Clemson University Educational State Forest there, but everything that's come up it is Bradford Pear underneath that. And one reason I was to the wildlife corridors, being it forms that hedge or that barricade essentially, is Callery pears have thorns, and it was bred out of it when it became, when they did within the Bradford Pear variety. But within one generation of being back into the wild, these thorns come back. And this is not a joke. These thorns are deadly, and they can get up to be about 4 inches long if, depending on the age of the tree. They'll get bigger as the tree matures. And they do not break. They've been known to puncture tires, like tractor tires, on farms and stuff. So they are no joke. And it's definitely, why wildlife will stop and decide to go a different way. And I think I mentioned this a little bit down the road. We'll start to get into a little bit more about what can we do. It's not enough just to cut down the trees. You have to actually control it. They're very aggressive. They'll resprout back like crazy, as most invasive species do. So, fire's on here, and that's mainly for wooded areas. If you're a farm or a forest, they'll burn to control it. In urban landscapes, most of us homeowners, we're going to come back in with an herbicide and treat the stumps once we cut it. Most of the time, especially if it's a mature, fully, 20, 30-year-old tree that you're dealing with, it has enough reserves in the root system that it's going to resprout. And it'll resprout multiple times if you don't treat it with anything. And then what this last bullet point here, where it talks about reduce parent trees, increase awareness, this is where we come in with the Bradford Pear Bounty. And this is the origin story behind the Bradford Pear Bounty. We're not the first state to do it. Our program here in North Carolina is very heavily based off the South Carolina program. They're not the first to do it. They've had Bradford Bounty type events in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Indiana. So we're not the first, but it's the first for North Carolina. We're just not the first in the country. And the sole purpose behind this is to increase the awareness. This is definitely an urban issue. It's becoming a suburban and a rural issue because of how urbanized we are becoming. North Carolina is an urban state. We are one of the most rapidly urbanizing states in the country. So there's not too much, purely rural, untouched areas of forest land in North Carolina. The Bradford Bounty idea is derived in the idea of removing the parent trees and increasing awareness. And this is a picture of David Coyle here. He's at Clemson University. Go Tigers! I'm a Clemson alum. So, and they did their first event in 2019, 2020 is when he first did it. They've done about 10 or so far, and they have a bunch planned for the remainder of this year and into 2023, where homeowners cut the trees down and they go to these events and they get replacement trees. So that's pretty much what ours is from as well. One thing South Carolina was able to do, which would be phenomenal, is they were able to get the attention of legislature. They got enough backing and enough interest that the nursery industry, I'm not sure they necessarily came on board. They're being told that by 2024, they are no longer allowed to sell Bradford pears from the nursery stock. They're giving them a little bit of time to start transitioning their nursery stock over because they don't want to cause the nurseries financial difficulty. But they've identified Bradford pear as a significant problem. It is taking over our woodlands. And so I was happy to see that South Carolina legislature actually banned the sale for Bradford pear. And a couple other species, you can go to Clemson, the Clemson Bradford Pear Bounty website, and you can actually read the full article and stuff and what it means. But we're not there yet in North Carolina. It may go that route. In North Carolina, Bradford pear has been identified as a significant threat. It is the highest level threat of invasive species by the Native Plant Society here in North Carolina. They have kind of 3 tiers, significant threat, somewhat threat, and kind of a predicted threat. This is some species that have indicators of being an invasive species, but they haven't hit it yet. And Bradford pear is one of 5 invasive tree species in North Carolina. It's a significant threat. So that's where the North Carolina Bradford Pear Bounty program came. So we added Tara here because she wasn't able to make the actual event, but we had our first event in Greensboro back in April of 2022, just a few months ago. There I am in the middle, and we've got Kelly Oaten here on my side. She's with NC State, and then Jennifer Rawl is with the North Carolina Forest Service. The four of us kind of put our brains together and our resources together, and we're able to successfully have our first Bradford Pear Bounty event. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time kind of just introducing the program itself. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but I figure if y'all know about it, you can kind of spread the news and get it spread across the state so more homeowners are aware of this opportunity to get rid of Bradford pear and replace it with a native tree in their yard. So there's the Bradford Bounty. But first, we got to have some money. So I'll give props to two of the grants that we were able to successfully get in order to get this started. So Duke Energy Foundation gave the Urban Forest Council a grant to help upstart it, and Kelly Oaten at NC State was able to get a NEFA grant, Renewable Resources Extension, through the extension service there to help get it started. And we were able to develop the website, create some outreach efforts from it, and get the trees brought in. So I wanted to give props to that, to those groups. So that's where we got started from. And this is straight from the website, and I'll have the link in a little bit, but and it's a lot of text. I don't like to have a lot of words, but I'll figure I'd go ahead and put it on here. So for all Bradford Bounty events, pre-registration is required. All you have to do is be a North Carolina citizen. Even though each of the events, we're trying to have enough events that each event is targeting the locals around that. So if the one in Greensboro, we're targeting Greensboro, Guilford County, and maybe some of the neighboring counties, so that people don't have to travel too far. But all you have to do is be a North Carolina resident to register, to qualify. We just try to target the locals. So pre-registration required. We have a site, and I'll kind of show you where that link is a little bit later. Tree removal is on the responsibility of the homeowner, and that's something that we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can, financially assist some of them. What we have been able to do is get, because we know that puts the onus, the financial hardship on the homeowner, which isn't always so great. And we don't want to cause any safety or liability issues by homeowners removing their own large Bradford pears if they're not used to handling chainsaws and stuff like that. That can lead to all kinds of problems. So we have been able to successfully partner with some local tree companies that have offered a 15% discount. So for like the ones coming up in Monroe and Matthews, Carolina Tree Care and Heartwood Tree Service, sorry, drew a blank, and Heartwood Tree Service have offered a 15% discount for homeowners that call and request the removal of a Bradford pear tree as part of this program event. And we have that information on the website as well if you want to get their contact information. So we're trying to find solutions to this bullet point. We're hoping that if we can get some more financial backing through grants and donations, that we can come up with kind of a cost share or some kind of financial way to help homeowners that might be lower income or that qualify to help with the removal. But we haven't worked that out yet. One other thing is participants must show up at the event. We don't deliver the trees. They have to come to the event at that certain date and time to pick up their own trees. So they have to be able to cart the trees back to them, back to their house. And all they do when they show up, they just have to show us before and after photos of the tree. So they take a picture of the tree from far away and well as close up, making sure you get the leaves. If it's not flowering, not an issue, just kind of get a picture of the leaves and the buds and the bark, and you just show it standing, and then you show a picture of it being on the ground, hopefully, or just the stump removed. And we verify that at the event. And then the replacement trees are all native. At this point, we've successfully been able to provide all native trees, although that might not always be the case because of nursery availability, but we are focusing on native. And it's a first come, first served basis. And it's a 1-for-1. You can remove up to 5 Bradford pears. Well, you can remove as many Bradford pears as you want, but as long as it's on your property. And then you can get up to 5 trees. It's supposed to be a 1-to-1. So if you remove 1 Bradford pear, you get 1 free tree. And the trees, if you could remember, you see that picture from before back here, this is, they're 3 to 7 gallons typically. So they're not huge trees, but they're decent size depending on the species. Some of these trees back here, you can see that's a sycamore, I think. They can be pretty tall from the start. So they're not too little, but that's kind of where they come from. And then we did the announcement. So this was the first time we did it this past spring. We announced it in late February, early March, and we had the event at the end of April. And it went like gangbusters. We got so much interest in this program, which is great, from media, from homeowners across the state. We had so many people register for this event, which is wonderful. And this was from Kelly. She did a lot of the interviews and stuff for us this first go round. And so we announced, I said, at the beginning of March, and within a couple of weeks, we had over 10 requests for media, TV or radio interviews. There was over 25 news articles printed or on websites across the state. The website itself that we created was visited over 40,000 times. So that's just an overwhelming response, which is great, because it allowed us to build it on it, because we weren't sure how the Greensboro one was going to go. And all in all, it was mostly favorable. We did get a couple of negative comments about how people that love Bradford pear, because they're pretty, but this is an education thing. We didn't expect everybody to be on board. And a lot of what's on the website and what we're trying to push is opening people's eyes to the fact that, yes, it might be a pretty tree, and it might be a tree that was on your grandmother's property, your grandfather's property, or whatever, but it's causing problems. and there's a solution for it. I wanted to draw out some of the partners for some of this, because even though we have the 4 main organizations that are behind kind of like founding the program, each of the events themselves are heavily supported by local groups. So the Greensboro one, you can see that's on this group here. We had an overwhelming support from local groups, from the city itself to a bunch of the green groups, Greensboro Beautiful and Triad Wild and the Native Plant Society. They all helped with donating money so we can purchase more trees and help with volunteering and getting the word out. So the other 2 events that we have planned for October, Town of Matthews and Town of Monroe, we're just kind of getting started on what the local groups are, but it's very heavily supported by the local tree and natural resource people. And then, so here, how's the event work? This is my lovely, my Vanna White pose. The Greensboro one was a drive-through event. They may or may not be drive-through events moving forward. But people would drive up, they get directed to the right lane, because we had a multiple lane event. And then the next stop, they stop at the next station, and that's where we would actually check to verify that they pre-registered, how many trees they pre-registered for, and then we checked off that they were able to supply before and after pictures of each of the trees. We kind of verified it there on site. Once they were approved, they were sent to the next station. This is a picture of the in action with our man's best friend there. They chose a pawpaw. That's a joke. Although I actually think they did choose a pawpaw. That was one of the species available. So this is us kind of verifying their trees removed and the number of trees they registered for. So then they move to the next station, which is where they get to select the trees that they want. Because again, it is a first come, first served. I think the one in Monroe, they are pre-registering for the trees species. So we're trying that out, but typically it's going to be a first come, first serve. So we have the next station has the list of species, and we have a flip card chart giving the characteristics of each of the trees there, so people know the mature height, because that is critical. You don't want to plant a tree that's going to get 80 feet tall if it's not in a good location that doesn't have enough space above and below ground. So we have the species list separated up by small maturing trees. That's about 20 to 25 feet. medium, which goes up to about 40, and then anything over about 45 feet we consider to be a large maturing tree. And they can select whichever species they want. And then they move on to the next one, and this is our friends with the Forest Service helping us out. And they brought the trees to the vehicles themselves and helped each of the homeowners put them in the cars appropriately. They were left with some information on how to plant the tree correctly, how to water it and mulch it and maintain it for the first few years of its life so it succeeds. And this is just more pictures from that event in Greensboro. We actually only gave away about half of the trees. A lot of folks didn't sign up because when I said it went like gangbusters, we had people registering and signing up from across the state. That even though we told them, we reached back out to them and told them, this is, you live 2 hours away, you have to come get this tree. Are you sure you really want to come get this tree and drive 4 hours round trip? And most of them said yes. And then of course the day of, they didn't show up, but so it's not a lesson learned. We're going to allow more people to register, and now we understand that probably about 20-25% of people that register may not show up, but we're going to keep it on a first come first serve basis. We had amazing volunteer support at this one from the Forest Service, Urban Forest Council, and the Wildlife Federation chapter there, Triad Wild, and Native Plant Society, which is great. So it was a really successful event. As I said, we have some lessons that we learned here about how to make the requirements on how more obvious, and then allow for more registers and trees available. So we kind of take care of that overage from the start. I'm trying to think. There's more, so because these are trees that we ended up having to ship. We had to gather all the leftover trees and get them to the extension office there. And then we actually had them transported down to Matthews, and the town of Matthews was kind enough to take over the maintenance and watering of those trees through the summer. So a lot of the trees that are going to be available, not a lot, but some of them are left over. They've been pretty well maintained and watered and babied and taken care of all summer. So it's allowed us to have a couple events off of the one event of funding that we had. And these are the leftover trees. I had to organize them. So it created a lot more work for us and more logistics. I got really good workout hauling these trees around everywhere, offloading them and loading them back up, and loading them back up and offloading them again. So we're going to hopefully not have that happen at all events. But you always learn things in the first time doing anything. So what's next? And I kind of hit on this a little bit. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Tara mentioned it a couple of times. We do have 2 events planned for this fall. One in the town of Matthews, October 15th from 9 to 11, and then one in Monroe. It's for the Union County event with the Wildlife Federation there, and the Cooperative Extension and the Forest Service there are pretty heavy. And we're going to get master gardeners involved in both of these from what I've heard. So those are 2 coming up in your neck of the woods. We are also planning our 2023 bounty events. So this is all in the works. Right now, these are our tentative locations. We're working out confirming these. Hopefully we'll have these confirmed later this fall so that we can advertise it and get interest so that people know we're coming to them soon. So right now we're tentatively looking at these 5 locations. We're trying to rally some grant funds and some donations to help carry these things out. We actually have a pretty good opportunity with the U.S. Forest Service. We're going to put together a grant, a multi-state grant that we're working on right now to try and get this program in probably 5 or 6 states in the Southeast, where each state there'll be funding to have at least 3 programs or Bradford Pear Bounty events in each of the states that sign on. So we're working on that grant now. We've got some donations and some partnerships in the works that are going to allow us to have a couple, one in the Raleigh-Durham area for sure, and one in Sanford we're kind of putting together. And we're working on the Wilmington, Greenville, and Hickory ones. So we've kind of hit the center part of the state in the spring and fall of this year. So next year we're hoping to kind of take it to the other regions of the state. So that's the idea. And we're hoping to be able to continue to offer anywhere from 3 to 5 a year moving forward, and kind of build and grow from there. But again, it's all based on what funding's available and what kind of support we have, resources we have available between all the different agencies and groups involved. And then Tree Bounty NC, that's the website. So treebountync.com. That's where you go to actually register for these two events. As I said, it's a pre-registration. So when you go to the website, there'll be a link to register for the Matthews event, and a link to register for the Monroe event. And you just plug in your information, where you are, how many trees you plan to remove, how many trees you expect to get. And we're going to keep that website updated as we confirm more locations and dates. And you'll notice that we left it kind of generic, Tree Bounty instead of Bradford Bounty. And we did that so that we can, as other invasive trees become more problematic, we can maybe use this platform as a way to draw attention to it, increase awareness, maybe do some similar kind of bounty events for other invasive species in North Carolina, and kind of, you know, bring the issues with invasive trees or invasive plants in general to the forefront of just everyday citizens. Because most people, they don't know a maple from a pine tree. Honestly, they think, you know, a tree is a tree, a plant is a plant. And you're like, it's being sold in the stores and the nurseries. It's not an issue. If it's being sold, why would they send me something that's causing, sell me something that's causing a problem? So we need to increase the awareness of the issue with invasive species, particularly in our urban areas, because that's where most of those species are being planted. I think that's all I actually have. I don't know. Let's see. I've got a couple of questions I'm looking at. One is, any idea of the newer varieties like Chanticleer may one day go by the way of Bradford and become invasive? It's possible. I hate to say that Bradford, it's altogether possible that all those other varieties that we're all calling Bradfords are probably, not necessarily all Bradfords. So, as I said, nature finds a way. And just because it's a different variety, Bradford was supposed to be sterile. And the reason why everybody's focused on Bradford is because that was the first variety. It was the most popular variety. So who's to say, I guess, in all likelihood, probably yes, just because that's the way things work. But I don't have a clear answer. And then it says, is the event only for residents of the designated city? And that's something that I want to make sure everybody understands. So you do not have to, for most of them, you do not have to be a resident. That's not a requirement of the Bradford Bounty event. And so for our events, you just have to be a North Carolina resident, and you have to be willing to drive to the designated city. So if the one in Matthews, if you live in Greensboro or you live in High Point and you want to drive to Matthews to get your tree, come on. It's a matter of what you're willing to do for it. We're hoping to make these events be more easily available across the state, so you don't have to drive very far. So we're trying to market the events to the town that the events are taking place in and their surrounding areas. That's the focus, but you're not required to be there. I don't know if any other questions came in.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to ask a question, you can also put in the chat. So you could put it in the chat or the Q&A box. This was awesome, though. I'm sure we all learned tons about the Bradford Pear, and I hope everyone signs up for either the October 15th or the October 22nd bounty events. Sonia, were there any questions from the live room that we have? Okay, I will take that as a no. That sounds perfect. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I know we learned a ton here, and we actually have a comment. This has been outstanding. I have a much better understanding now and really appreciate the program. So many thanks.
My pleasure.
Thank you for the comment, Nancy. All right, well, if that's all, thank you, Leslie. Thank you all, and hope you have a great evening, and hope to see you at one of the bounty events coming up soon.
Yeah, come on. And we're local support. So if you want to have one in your area, you can always reach out to us and we'll work with you to try to figure out if we can make it happen. So
perfect. Thanks all. I hope you have a good night or day or evening or morning. Thanks all. Bye.